Apologetics. Let me go ahead and pray and then we will begin. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this morning, this opportunity to gather together. Lord, to encourage one another to grow in the faith. Lord, to hear truths spoken about who you are, what you've done. Lord, prepare our hearts. Encourage us. Fill us with your spirit. Open our minds, our hearts. And Lord, I pray you would use me in this broken vessel. I pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. All right, here we go. Again, my name is Aaron Niger. I'm here from the Sacramento area, locally. Today we're going to be talking about offensive apologetics. I titled it that to try to be a little provocative, so you might wonder why offensive. We're not supposed to be offensive as Christians. But really the point of the message is to be on the offensive. That we as Christians can be on the offensive. Most of the time we're stuck defending Christianity, right? How many of you have been questioned by a friend? Immediately you are put on the spot. You've got to come up with some answer, right? And sometimes we stumble over our words. But that doesn't always have to happen. Most of the time they're sitting back, they're listening and watching you fumble, or they don't like the answer that you give to them. But hopefully today, as we look at a few things, I hope to give you some tools so that you can be the one who's sitting back and listening. You're the one who is not put on the spot. How many of you are familiar with apologetics? A few of you. All right. How many of you were drug here kicking and screaming and really had no idea what you're getting yourself into? Let's be honest. Okay, a couple of you. How many of you have studied apologetics before? Okay. How many of you have ever been engaged in apologetics? I would bet that every single one of you at some point in your life has been engaged in apologetics. You just didn't follow it. Anytime that you're having to defend your faith or someone's asking you what you believe and why you believe it, you're engaged in apologetics. It could be even something you do at home and talking with your family members about God and about the Scriptures. Apologetics can be a scary subject. I would say most of the time I don't engage people because I'm scared. How many of you are scared that you're not going to have the answer to the person when they ask you the question? I mean, honestly. We're afraid. If we get into a conversation, we might have a couple answers, but we're going to get to a point where there's something we don't have an answer for, and we're going to look foolish. At least we think we're going to look foolish. Just the thought of talking to someone about our faith scares and terrifies us. Or you have the Sunday high, right? You come to church and you hear the pastor or your youth pastor talk about things. You go to a conference and you hear all the evidence for the Scriptures. You're all fired up, and then you go to school Monday and you get bombarded by what your teacher has to say. You get bombarded by your friends and the lifestyle that they're choosing to live, and they're desiring you to come and follow it. And you write that down. It's back and forth. I remember when I first became a Christian, I would go to the Barnes and Noble still exists, right? I'd go to the bookstore and I'd go to the religious section, and I'd go there, excited, and then I'd go and I'd see within the Christian, there's Christian books in there, but within the other, there's the other books trying to tear down Christianity. And I'd look at them and I'd think, oh man, look at what they're having to say. And I would be going back and forth. I'd leave there discouraged. Maybe I'm not believing what I should believe. Are these people right? But the fact is that we are here not to prove Christianity is true, but because it is true. The line that Richard said that really stood out to me that goes along with my lesson, he says, atheists deny a being that cannot not exist. And that is absolutely true. And as you study apologetics, and as you grow in your faith, you are going to be overwhelmed with the fact that Christianity cannot not be true. It is the only worldview that stands once all the other ones crumble, as we're going to look throughout our lesson here. So let me just talk about a few goals, and I'll give you a little outline of what we're going to talk about. Goals. First, one of my goals is I want you to leave here confident. I want you to leave here confident knowing that you can talk to people about the truth of Christianity easily and without having to be afraid of being put in a position to not have an answer. You don't have to you can adequately defend the faith. You don't have to be an expert in everything. You know, sometimes we come to conferences like this or we hear something our youth pastor or our pastor talks about, and we're like, wow, that's really awesome, but you know, that's for the experts. You don't have to be an expert in everything. Obviously, learning these things is very important, but you don't have to be an expert in everything. You don't have to know what every other religion teaches. You don't have to know what all of this teaches, though it's very important to know those things. You don't have to. And I'll give you some tools and ways in which you can engage people easily. I'm not going to overwhelm you with a bunch of evidence. Most importantly, I want you to think more biblically. I want you to think, what I like to say is, I want you to think by design. I want you to think according to the way in which you were created to think. God created you in a certain way. He's made your mind a certain way, and you are to think that way. You may have never thought about that. You may have never thought that there's different ways to think, but there is. You were created to think by design. I liken it. I used to talk in the youth group where my kids when they were younger, and now they think it's silly. I used to say it's like a chainsaw, you know. The chainsaw has been designed to do something, right? You use a chainsaw to cut wood. Your parents tell you to go outside and cut. No, maybe they don't trust you with a chainsaw, but a chainsaw was made to cut wood to make it easier, right? So we don't have to use hands. But what happens if we throw some toothpaste on there and we brush our teeth? Terrible damage will happen to your mouth and your teeth, right? You're using this thing that was designed a certain way to function in a way it wasn't designed to function. And that's exactly the same thing that happens to the world and people when they choose to be autonomous and go off and create their own reality, create their own thought process, and they think that they can just think any way that they want, create their own worldview. And as you can see, the world in which we live in is evidence for what happens when we try to do that. I don't want you to leave here thinking this would be great, but I can never do it myself. I want you to relax. I want you to be confident. I want you to be comfortable. And I want you to feel comfortable engaging people, where you can just sit down and have a conversation with them. I don't want you to be afraid, but I want you to look forward to talking to people. So, those are some of the goals I hope to accomplish. The basic outline, you know what, I don't know what I was thinking. Brianna, while I'm talking, can you please pass out the outline? I have outlines for notes, and I totally need space to pass it. You guys can split them and just bring them. Hopefully I have enough. Yeah. I apologize. But here's my basic outline. First, I want to talk about a biblical perspective. I want you to have a biblical perspective on apologetics, what the Bible has to say. Then I'm going to give you some tools to be on the offense, and then I'm going to talk about the ultimate goal of apologetics. Hopefully, you have a pen that we're going to use. All right. Hopefully, you can catch up with the notes. All right, we'll start with a biblical perspective, okay? What is apologetics? What is apologetics? Apologetics comes, I'm sure many of you have heard before, apologetics comes from the Greek word apology, right? It is a word that today, when we talk about apology, we think of just saying sorry to someone. But apologetics actually means to defend, to stand before someone and give a defense for something a lawyer might do. The definition I'm going to use is apologetics is the discipline that teaches Christians how to give a reason for their hope. So it's a discipline that teaches Christians how to give a reason for their hope. Okay? It's no different than you studying in a sense. If you're going to pass the test on biology, what do you got to do? You got to study. If you're going to pass, if you don't study, no, you're not going to do well. Maybe you're good at taking tests. Some people are good at taking tests. You're not going to pass. Okay? All right, let's take look at a few verses. They're in the notes there. The first one is 1 Peter 3:15, common verse used in apologetics. And I want to just walk through the verse. We'll talk about some of the things it says. First, it says, "But in your heart, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do this with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, Those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. So a few things I want to look at here. First, one of the first things Paul says is that we are to honor Christ as Lord. Okay? We are to honor Christ as Lord, Christ the Lord as holy. So right from the very beginning, Jesus Christ is the Lord. He's not something we reason to. He is the Lord of Christians. And we set him apart as holy. He is the foundation on which we stand as Christians. You can't throw Christ out when you're defending the faith. He's the foundation. He also goes on, he says, always be prepared. Then what does that mean? I mean, it's obvious. It means we must be ready. If we're going to do anything, if any of you are into sports, are you going to be good if you never go to practice? Okay, whatever. Just think about your favorite hobby or whatever you like to do. Are you going to be good at that if you never practice? No, it's part of, in the same way Paul tells us to be prepared. And we'll talk about some ways in which we can prepare ourselves for engagement with different people. We need to study and we need to know the scriptures. But, some of the things I'm going to give you here, you don't have to know everything right off the bat. You learn as you go. If you get in a situation where you talk to someone and you don't have an answer, that's okay. You can tell them, hey, that's a great question. I haven't thought about that. When you think about that, and I'll get back to you. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You don't have to have all the answers, but we should try to prepare ourselves. Paul tells us here, he says, make a defense. Defend what we believe. And what are we making a defense? Anyone who asks for our hope. People in this world are looking for hope. They want to hope in something. Right? They want to hope in something. You just think about these people who we see on TV who have everything. And their lives, they have no hope. They are attached to material possessions. They're attached to things of this world, and they know that they can't take them with them. They have no hope. We are giving people a reason for our hope. Paul also tells us to do it with gentleness and respect. How many of you have talked to someone who's just a total jerk? Do you want to listen to them? If they're telling you about something, no matter what it is, you could like it, but if they're being a jerk about it, you don't want to listen to them. You want, as a Christian, to be a loving, a gracious, and a person when you talk to them. And lastly, he says, you will be slandered and reviled. So don't be surprised if people slander you, make fun of you because of what you believe. And know that if you say you believe in God and a person immediately makes fun of you, the reason they're doing it is because they have no arguments. They attack you immediately because they can't defend what they believe. They have no defense, so it's the easiest thing to do is just to attack the person, make them look stupid, and then walk away. Unfortunately. The second verse we'll look at here is also in your notes. Is 2 Corinthians 10:5. This is one of my favorite verses. It's kind of the theme of my ministry. Is that we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. The next two verses are talking about our minds. Paul tells us here that we are actually involved in destroying arguments. That is offensive. We are destroying arguments and every lofty opinion raised against God, raised against the knowledge of God. And then he says to take every thought captive to Christ. What does that mean? If Paul is telling us these things, it's for a reason. If Paul says don't lust, the reason he tells you that is because we have a problem with it, right? Paul tells us to take every thought captive. We are engaged in transforming our minds from the way the world thinks, the way sinful man thinks, transforming the way we think into a biblical Christian worldview. And that takes effort, that takes time, and renewing your mind as we're going to look in the next verse. We must take all of our thoughts, our worldview, captive to obey Christ. Our thoughts and our minds must be captivated by Christ, by the gospel. We must think Christian. Let's go ahead and move on to Romans 12. Again, this is just giving you a biblical framework. Where do we go and find out what apologetics is? We go to the authority, right? We go to the authority, and that's the scriptures. Romans 12:2. So it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Amazing passage. Think about what it's telling you. It says, it's comparing two things. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We have to transform our minds. The world thinks and does things one way. As Christians, we have to know what is the proper way to think. Where do we find that? Do we just make it up on our own? What is our authority? Ultimately, you will find that apologetics is all about authority. Who is your authority? He says, do not be conformed to this world. You know, we are bombarded by this world, aren't we? By so many different things, whether we're on the internet, whether it's social media, whether it's the advertisements in the social media, on TV, radio, magazines, advertisements, video games, billboards, friends, teachers. I'm sure you can all relate to how everything in the world is different than what you hear in church. Is that not true? It's completely different world, a completely different way of thinking about what is right and what is wrong. How do you know what is right and what is wrong? Are you God? Are you the one who can choose what is right and what is wrong? Or is there an ultimate authority that tells us what is right and what is wrong? And what if you are the one who determines what's right and wrong? What if your right and wrong conflicts with your buddy next to you or your friend next to you? Who wins? The person who's the strongest, the person who's going to beat the other person up? Force and strength, is that what determines what's right and wrong? Paul says, don't be conformed to this world, rather be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We need to be transformed. We are sinners and are in many ways like the world. We need to have our minds changed. Our minds need to be directed by the Word of God. Another thing to focus as well is that our minds need to govern our hearts. I can't tell you how many times in being a youth pastor I've had someone come to me to ask me about a relationship. Right? And as soon as they come, I already kind of have an idea of what I'm going to get myself into. They're going to the reason they're coming to me is because they're going to tell me I'm dating someone and they're not. Right? I already know the fact that they're not going to listen to anything that I say from that point. They already know. The reason that they're coming to me is because they already know something's not right, but they're going to make every excuse you could ever imagine. I know that I can bring them to the faith. You know, they're going to do missionary dating. I know, but they're not going to listen. They've already gone with what their heart tells them. They've already given their hearts and their emotions to another person, and they are not going to give that up. In their mind, they know what's true and what they should do, but they're not going to listen to them. They're going to listen to how they feel. The fact is that as Christians, our hearts and our lives need to be directed by what we know is true. How many of you have days where you just feel like God is not there? Oh, come on. How many of you have had days where you feel like God is not there? Okay, I have them all the time. Do we believe our feelings? Do we trust our feelings? Do we go along with our feelings? We can sit there and we can just feel like garbage because we feel like God is not there. But we rather need to believe what God said. What did Jesus say? I will never leave you or forsake you. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. What matters is you know that Jesus said he would be with you no matter what. We have to allow our minds to direct our hearts. And Paul ultimately says this will help us discern what is right and what is wrong. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the why apologetics. This is a short one, just a couple notes you can take there. Why apologetics? Why do we even have to engage in apologetics? Why do you think we even have to engage in apologetics? Apologetics exists because of the fall. We have to defend the existence of God or our hope because people out there don't believe because they are fallen. They are dead in their sins. So apologetics exists because of the fall, but it